Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. Journalism in India today is a profession fraught with risk. India is low down at 159 out of 180 countries on the RSF index of media freedom. Why is the perception of India's press freedom so poor? The threats to Indian journalists are many. They come not just from the government but also the corporate sector, private contractors, and now increasingly because of new laws and regulatory mechanisms that are being put in place by the government. What does the weaponization of law mean? Today's guest is N. Ram, an eminent journalist who has seen the Indian media closely for well over 50 years, and he was the editor in chief of The Hindu. He has broken some great stories and currently is a director of the Hindu Publishing Group. N. Ram, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you, Siddharth. It's always a pleasure talking to you about these subjects.
You've been a journalist and in the media for such a long time, seen the profession change for better and for worse. If you were to sum up the situation today in India, what would you say?
Yes, I think for better and for worse, because we were witnesses to and participants in the period during the period when the press was flourishing with the business model based on advertising, particularly after the anti-people emergency of 1975-77. Journalism then took off. Independent journalism took off. Investigative journalism took off, and it also addressed many issues close to the people of India, the working people of India, the poorest of the poor, and as well as the others. Those were wonderful times. Then the whole ecosystem changed with the arrival of the internet, the new technologies, and so on, and new pressures, disruption. The media at times looking helpless, flailing about to find a business model. But today, I'm much more optimistic than there was, say, 10 years ago, when things looked pretty bleak, or even 5 years ago. Because I think in the social media, where there's a great deal of disinformation, on the one side, you also have space for voices that really stand for independent journalism, brave journalism, people-oriented journalism, and you represented the Wire, one of the best performers, one of the best exponents in this field. Digital news providers, a portal in many languages. You have your limitations in terms of resources, but in terms of quality and also the ability to affect or influence the public agenda, not directly necessarily, but by bringing issues to the fore or new information, you're able to participate in building a progressive agenda. So that's how I see it. So I'm quite hopeful in the midst of a lot of difficulties, economic difficulties for many of the news media, many sections of the news media, and then assaults by the state. And as you mentioned, you implied, I think, lawfare by corporates and others, trying to create fear in the media that you can't touch these subjects, and that works to a considerable extent. But there are voices out there, and that's what gives me hope, particularly young people. I think going on YouTube, doing podcasts, and of course writing very good articles, long articles in the long form, opinion pieces, investigative pieces. So I think it is exactly that, for better and for worse, or for worse and for better.
Yeah, but let's talk for a minute about the worst part of it, and that is the kinds of pressure that have emerged from mainly from the government, but also from, as we discussed, the corporate sector. But what about, this fear that journalists have, that the safety of journalists, the security of journalists being arrested and jailed? and the charges, the severe charges of sedition being applied. There have been many journalists, brave journalists, no doubt, who got killed. But there are pressures from the government, wouldn't you say?
Yes. What you said, let's just look at them briefly. 20 journalists have been killed have been murdered in the last decade, all in connection with the work, not in some private dispute and so on, a quarrel, in connection because of their work, particularly investigative work. This has included uh, freelancers in small places and also editors of newspapers, Gauri Lankesh and some others as well, senior journalists as well. They have been targeted. I'm not saying this or that government, but there have been cases where officialdom seems to be involved, cases where contractors, other criminal elements have been involved. So but it's a pretty grim picture. But apart from, and in the previous decade, we had 10 journalists killed. As you know, the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, tracks this meticulously, looks at every case and puts it on their website only if the murder or assault is in connection with their work, not private disputes, which may see journalists caught in the crossfire. Um, as for those in behind bars, those who lost their freedom, I think there are 4 right now. Kashmir situation is atrocious. You can't have any kind of independent journalism there, and yet people seem to speak up. And the good news is occasionally courts, Jammu and Kashmir High Court, or even lower courts, they give bail. And then so what the governments which target these journalists do is they bring in other cases or they bring in enforcement once you get bail. It's happened to several journalists. This need not be exaggerated. These are highly selectively targeted. Not everyone is attacked in this way, and as you mentioned, it creates a climate. It is meant or designed to create a climate of fear, of deterrence. Don't take it up. And then on top of that, pressure put on the owners, the proprietors. Rajdeep Sardesai, in his book on the last elections, in chapter 14, called "You Are the Godi Media," I think it's an excellent chapter, and he refers to calls from the Prime Minister's office directly to proprietors, and also the way they monitor everything, and really weighing down on any kind of dissent or anything that affects the image of the Prime Minister in particular, or perhaps the Home Minister too. This kind of management of the media is unprecedented. Of course, we've had total censorship of the press during the emergency. That was a totally different experience. But now it's a media machine. But the media machine can't get everything right. It's in many ways it is inefficient, and therefore I think they are struggling, particularly to regulate and control and bring in line people on the digital platforms, voices, experienced journalists as well as young journalists. 2 examples would be Ravish Kumar and Dhruv Rathi. Dhruv Rathi is not a journalist. He started out on YouTube as a science educator, and then he came up with this deep question: is India a democracy, which went viral, and the sequel to it. But there are many other voices, including experienced people like you, adopting the new technology, let's say, or the new platforms in imaginative ways, which shows that although there is an attempt towards concentration of ownership, particularly in the news television, huge concentration, there is still enough diversity across the media landscape, because India is so diverse, so pluralistic, that these voices can still do it. And if you stand up, I think people discover themselves. And Rana Ayub is a case in point. There are many others who stand up, and they can go on.
You were a journalist during the emergency. I had just begun my career, and I remember, and you would know far better than I do. About how there was always the incipient threat of your press being shut down, journalists being jailed, some journalists were jailed. Uh,
And
how,
cases were, by the way, cases were registered against Mr. Ramnath Goenka.
yeah,
I think at one
yes.
point, some huge, was it more than 100? I'm not sure of the number, but huge number. And he didn't buckle
Uh,
under that.
how do you see the situation vis-a-vis press management compared to then and today? And how do you see journalists reacting? How have things changed? That was let's not forget that was a legally imposed, so-called legally imposed emergency,
Yes.
so-called, but it
Yes.
was an emergency.
Yes, it was total, and I didn't see any real anyone standing up. Whatever they claimed later on, I didn't see any evidence of defiance because there's no question there was censorship. There may have been some underground publications. But they were small time. But nobody really stood up, and the few journalists who had openly opposed the government were under preventive detention, like Kuldeep Nair and so on. So Mr. Advani's famous statement that you know you're asked to kneel, you crawl, I think is well taken. That's exactly what I think characterizes the attitude of the press, of the owners in particular of during that period, and this includes the Hindu, which did not at that time uh, stand up at all. The, this today, it's a different kind of media management attempt. It is not as efficient, but it's more toxic because it is part of an ideological offensive to divide people. It is communal. It is authoritarianism over the long term. It may be called incremental authoritarianism. You test the waters. You push something through. You capture institutions, and you want the goal is clearly the establishment of Hindu Rashtra in some form, and the ideology is Hindutva. We didn't have that during the emergency. In that sense, it was a more innocent face of political development in India, but it was nevertheless a dictatorship. I remember many of us wondered whether we'd ever see elections again or any kind of air to breathe. And then unexpectedly, in about 2.5 years, the whole situation changed. And, the election of 1977, the dictatorial regime was voted out, comprehensively voted out. Not that those who came after did a great job. They quickly collapsed. But that was a period when journalism took off. That was really a great time to be a journalist, post 1977. And you see a new kind of journalism emerging, breaking out of the old conservative mold. The progressive spirits, the radicalism of some of the journalism of the freedom struggle had faded out. This was the widespread perception. It was still pretty good journalism, but of the old type, staid, conservative, fact-based, but rather cautious. And that changed post-emergency, I think. Today, it's a new game. But as I said, I think they will find it very difficult to control all that is out there, the various voices. And now you have on YouTube, that's what I think I'm going to ask you about the Broadcasting Services Regulation Bill, if I may.
Yes, please.
Turn the question of 2024. How far do you think they can go with this? Because the attempt is to bring, I've not studied it very closely, but I think you have. The bill is classifying influencers and even social media pages that produce content or discuss current affairs or news online as digital news broadcasters. We already had that during the IT, intermediaries, those rules of 2021 subsequently amended. We saw some of this there. And then to impose a very expensive regime, very troublesome regime of self-regulation You have to set up a committee, and then goes up to the final arbiters are the committee of secretaries up there. All that, it's that part has been stayed, I think, the High Court. But how do you see this going?
Oh, it's as you know, it's with a committee. But after there has been talk among journalists, maybe completely exaggerated at this stage because no sign has come, that after this Ranveer Alabadia case about this
Yeah.
podcaster, this man who runs, this young boy who runs a YouTube show of with interviews of many government personages,
Yes.
including Mr. Shankar, Mr. Piyush Goyal. They were very glad to give him interviews before the elections because of his numbers, million plus. And he made some indiscreet and a stupid and crass remark at some other show. And the state has gone after him. The police in Assam has gone after him. I don't know why. Police in Bombay, Mumbai wants to get hold of him. He's got a stay from the Supreme Court. And there has been talk among journalists that this may be one trigger which the government may use to bring back another form of the broadcasting bill to say, listen, this kind of crassness is what we want to stop. And then we must have a mechanism for this. So that is the fear at this stage. As I said, there is no official word, but rumors have a way of becoming reality, and it's important that journalists be forewarned, alert to something like this. So let me spell out a few specifics. The not-for-profit status of Reporters Collective was not renewed. That has squeezed their funds, and now they're appealing for more money, but now donors will probably be a little wary. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which will impact investigative journalism, and now there is talk of bringing back the broadcasting bill, as we have been discussing. Plus the income tax bill, which in which an officer, somebody from the income tax department, can get into your digital spaces, look into your social media on a mere suspicion, and that though directly it is not aimed directly at journalists, but it can still affect journalists, because what if a journalist becoming inconvenient to this establishment has to explain his social media accounts? So you can see the weaponization of regulatory acts and laws.
Yes. Also, recently the reporters, the non-profit status of the Reporters Guild was cancelled by the Income Tax Department, saying that journalism doesn't serve any public purpose.
Public purpose. Well,
Yes.
so what do you think all that amounts to? All this amounts to? Is it,
I
if
think they're
not
using,
weaponized?
yes, they're using every means, every trick in the book through these agencies. As you said, agencies which should not have any connection with the exercise of media freedom, press freedom, to harass and put pressure on journalism. And again, I emphasize it's highly targeted. First, to suppress that voice. That voice may not be a great threat to the government, but they don't want more of that. And secondly, to send a message. And that, I think, is weaponization of the arms of the state, many more arms than we saw during the emergency, to uh, to to curb, restrain, and suppress free speech, especially critical journalism, hard-nosed investigative journalism, which exposes the misdeeds of the government, like the electoral bond scandal. Of course, there I think uh, some journalists made contributions, including the Wire, and I think they couldn't stop it, but they would next time they would try to do something to investigation, which proved quite successful, I think. But they are going to struggle to contain this in the internet space. First of all, to take things off the internet is not so easy. There's an international organization, INNEC, and there's a whole procedure to be followed. So what they do is to put pressure on service providers, yes. Often informally, or if they issue orders, the orders are not published. It's an insider sort of thing, exerting pressure, and that's what they're going to take up. But I think there are ways and means to resist it. I keep coming back to this. So the Wire, for example, has faced many problems, but you stood up. But you're still.
What about this case you were talking about, the Anand Vikatan case?
Yes, I can tell you. The Vikatan group, I know them very well, including the former editor, Mr. Balasubramaniam, and now Srinivasan is the managing director. It's got a distinctive style of magazine journalism. It's going to be 100 years old in a few months. The Vikatan group. The flagship is called Anand Vikatan, the magazine, and there are many products. And in recent times, they've taken many initiatives on the digital platforms. And one of them is called Vikatan Plus. It's a subscription-only digital offering. And this cartoon appeared a few days before Prime Minister Modi's meeting with the US President Donald Trump in the White House. Now, the context was Indians who were not undocumented Indians called illegal migrants by Trump. They were brought on a military plane with their hands and legs tied, chained, literally, and it became big news. There's a lot of resentment. The government of India did not, at least publicly, protest, did not take up the cause of these people who were virtually tortured on those long flights. It's an emotional thing. So the cartoonist, clearly referring to this or referencing this, drew this cartoon purely on the digital space, only for subscribers, showing Mr. Modi sitting like this with his hands and legs chained, and Trump making fun of it. That is also there. The cartoon is now widely available on the social media, and suddenly they blocked, without any notification, any statement, any private communication. Even the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, it turned out later, had blocked the whole website. It's really if you go to the website, there are many parts of it. It's a portal. They blocked the whole website, but I don't think they could block it efficiently, which is the good news, because I could still access it and many others could. So it didn't work completely, but a lot of people complained, and the Vikatan group then got evidence based on these complaints that you're blocking it. For days, the government remained silent, and then they acknowledged that they had blocked it on grounds of because it affected friendly relations with foreign states and so on. So this is going to be a matter. Then went to the Madras High Court. I think the Vikatan group handled it brilliantly. They didn't, there's nothing excessive there. They stood up. They continued with their website. They had the cartoon at the website. I was able to look at it. And then they went to the High Court. Once they had the documentation to show that it had been blocked, the court, I think there is a good judgment. It ordered the unblocking of the website. But since the government said that would be, if you allow the cartoon to remain, then the whole case is over. It's been decided. So they asked the Vikatan group to remove the cartoon there. But meanwhile, the cartoon is everywhere. It can't be stopped. They can't stop it.
But the government's position...
It was an idiotic... It was an idiotic thing to do, I would say. Apart from being wrong and unjust. Yeah.
But the government's position was very... the government, I think the government case said that this will affect international relations with friendly countries or something like that.
That's going to be a
you're
joke
right.
because on that point, it's under Article 19(2) of the Constitution, reasonable restrictions can be placed by law. It has to be by statute on freedom of speech and expression, which includes media freedom. It's part of it. On the relations with foreign states, and I've never heard anything being taken off or prosecuted for affecting or prejudicing friendly relations with foreign states. I don't think any court is going to take this seriously. The government has a very difficult case to defend here, but let's see.
Yeah, but what the Vikatan group did was quite exemplary, and I think it
Yeah.
should be a good kind of lesson for journalists. But what do you do when your bosses themselves, if you're a reporter and your bosses themselves, and I don't mean the editorial bosses alone, because the editors also fully participate in this, but
Yes.
also the corporate bosses, media control is in the hands of very few people. What do you do if the message comes from the top and you see these TV shows on a nightly basis in which
Yes.
prejudice, sucking up to the prime minister, if I may put it colloquially, and constantly hailing him and asking tough questions of the opposition, but asking softball questions to the BJP? What do you do if your bosses themselves are not ready to support you? What is the reporter to do?
This is a huge problem. We have a journalism school, the Asian College of Journalism. We tell our students that you learn to be independent. These are the values of journalism. This is why you're becoming a journalist. But beware, when you go to the newsroom, it may be different because you go to various places. And that's a very hard one to figure out. Each individual has to decide. Some of them may want to protect their careers. They have families to support. They have their own ambitions. Others can afford to openly differ with their bosses, so they have to take their own call. We can't provide general advice, but I would hope that a fair number of these young people will be able to stand up, and if a large number of people take a stand, it will be very difficult for the management to suppress it. And you see the difference between television and the print media. Of course, if the bosses are, I think television is exactly what you said. Now that NDTV is gone, his independence is gone, and its credibility is taken a big hit. But there are Indian language channels. I can tell you in Tamil Nadu there are perfectly credible a few news channels, leading channels, which have debates, which have opposition leaders. Critical opinions can be expressed of the central government, of the state government, of other parties. And I think there are such news channels in other languages as well. But with the so-called national channels, meaning English language channels, I think they're just gone. I don't see any here or there somebody like Rajdeep Sardesai or some other major journalists may make a difference, but they're gone. But as for the so-called legacy media, newspapers, I think they're still formidable players. Their print circulations may not be growing. They're still groping to find new ways. Sorry. of finding revenue, growing revenues. But I think good, solid journalism continues to be produced in those places by experienced as well as young journalists. The government finds it very difficult to suppress, to put down dissent there. You may have had odd cases. I think Dainik Bhaskar was a case in point. It did a very good job during the COVID-19
That's right.
pandemic.
But they got raided.
Yeah, if you have business interests, then you become vulnerable. But on the whole, there are quite a few newspapers, printed newspapers with good digital offerings that are doing quite well in this respect. And so it's not the emergency in that sense. It's not total.
Well, as you said, it's going to be very, very difficult um, for any government uh, to control all of the media in this diverse country of ours.
Yes.
So, on the whole, you would tell a young journalist from the Asian College of Journalism, but also from other institutions, any
Yes.
young journalist who came to talk to you, should I join journalism as a profession? What would you say? Would you say, yes, you can make a difference? Or would you say, get out while you can?
I'll say you can make a difference. You're not going to make the kind of money you might make if you're well educated and do well in the IT space or some in other businesses or some professional careers. But since you seem to be passionate about journalism, you want to do this, you can make a real difference. And I believe they are making a difference. There's some very good young people out there, and I can speak, as you said, even from other institutions as well, who come in without a journalism education background also, who are doing well. So I'm quite hopeful on that score.
And I think it's the social media that has made a difference
Yes,
ultimately. And my fear is that that's going to be, television has lost their utility even
yes.
for this establishment, but it is the social media. My fear is that it is the social media they will go after. So I think that's where all of us have to guard ourselves. Anyway, that's you are hopeful. You began with a note of hope, and you still retain that note of hope. I can see that. So thank you very much for this wonderful tour of what journalism is today, and the real dangers that could affect us in the coming years. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Ram.
Thank you, Siddharth. It's a pleasure
Yeah,
talking to you, as always.
that was Mr. N. Ram, editor, former editor of the Hindu, and currently a director on board of the Hindu Publishing Group, and a man with tremendous experience, an eminent journalist with some many great stories for the newer generation. I may tell them that his stories during the Beaufort scandal shook the country. We'll be back again next week with another guest. Till then, from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the rest of the Wire Talks team, goodbye.
Thank you.